Hey there, folks. Today we're diving into a crucial part of car maintenance, replacing your car's absorbers, also known as shock absorbers. If your ride's been feeling a bit bumpy, it might be time for a change. Let's get started. Alright, before we can access the shock absorber, we need to remove the front cowl cover grille. This will expose the top nuts holding the absorber, making it easier to remove them. Gently lift and remove the cowl cover grille. You should now have clear access to the top nuts of the shock absorber. With the cowl cover grille removed, we've made it much easier to reach and remove the top nuts holding the absorber. This step is crucial for a smooth replacement process. For this job, I highly recommend using an impact driver. It makes the process much quicker and easier. Once the nut is fully loosened, carefully remove it and set it aside. ABS sensor wire and the brake fluid hose are usually attached to the strut assembly. To remove the ABS sensor wire, gently unplug the connector. Be careful not to damage the wire. Now, locate the clip holding the brake fluid hose. This clip secures the hose to the strut. Using a pliers, carefully remove the clip. Make sure to keep the clip safe for reinstallation. Once the clip is removed, gently pull the brake fluid hose away from the strut. Ensure it's safely out of the way, so you can proceed with removing the shock absorber. Next, before we remove the strut assembly, it's a good idea to spray some penetrating fluid on the nuts and bolts holding the strut assembly in place. This will help loosen any rust or debris and make it easier to remove them. Here's a tip. Let the fluid sit for a few minutes to do its job. This will ensure the nuts and bolts come off smoothly and save you some effort. Now, as you can see here, to loosen the nut holding the shock absorber to the knuckle, you need to use another spanner to make sure it doesn't turn while you're loosening it. So, place one spanner on the bolt head to hold it steady, and then use an electric impact wrench to turn the nut. This way the bolt stays in place and you can easily remove the nut. As you can see here, I'm holding the stabilizer anti-roll bar drop link. To loosen the nut, you'll need to use another spanner to hold it in place and prevent it from turning. Sometimes this nut can be a bit tight, so it's a good idea to spray some penetrating fluid first. I'm using a hydraulic jack to support the suspension assembly. This is to prevent any sudden movement when we remove the strut. Place the jack under the control arm or a sturdy part of the suspension and slowly raise it until it just begins to lift the suspension. We don't want to lift the car, just support the suspension enough to take the weight off the strut. This will make it safer and easier to remove the strut bolts. Having the jack in place will help us avoid any sudden drops or movements, keeping the process safe and controlled. Alright, with the suspension supported and the strut assembly removed, our next step is to compress the coil spring. This is essential for safely removing the strut from the spring. I'm using a spring compressor to compress the coil spring. Position the compressor on opposite sides of the spring, ensuring it's securely attached. Gradually tighten the spring compressor, alternating between sides to ensure even compression. This will take the tension off the spring and make it safe to remove the strut. Be sure to go slowly and evenly. Rushing this step can be dangerous, as the spring holds a lot of tension. Once the spring is fully compressed, the strut will be loose and ready for removal. With the spring fully compressed, You can now safely proceed to remove the strut. Always double check that the screw is securely compressed before moving on. Here, you can see I'm using a damp cloth to clean the coil spring. It's important to get rid of any grime or dirt that may have accumulated over time. Once the coil spring is clean, you're ready to move on to the next step of reassembling the strut and spring. A clean spring will help ensure everything fits together smoothly and functions correctly. Carefully compress the strut by pushing it down. Once it's compressed, you can easily remove the clip or holder. Make sure to do this step gently to avoid any damage to the new strut. Start by positioning the coil spring onto the new strut. Make sure the spring is seated properly in the lower spring seat. Next, align the bump stop and dust boot onto the strut rod. These components are important as they help protect the strut and improve ride quality. Carefully slide the bump stop and dust boot into place. Ensure everything is aligned properly and securely positioned. Next, secure the top mount with the nut. Hand tighten the nut first to ensure everything is aligned properly. Once the nut is hand tightened, use a wrench to fully tighten it. Make sure it's snug, but be careful not to over-tighten, as this could damage the components. Tightening the top mount securely ensures that the strut and coil spring assembly stays in place and functions correctly when installed back into the vehicle. With the top mount secured, the strut and coil spring assembly is now ready for reinstallation. In this step, you want to make sure the surface where the strut assembly will be installed is thoroughly clean. Using brake fluid cleaner, spray the area to remove any grease, dirt, or debris. This ensures a smooth installation and helps prevent any future issues related to dirt or grime buildup. Ensures that everything is clean and ready for reassembly. I'm using contact cleaner to spray the ABS connector. This helps remove any dust, dirt, or corrosion that might affect the electrical connection. Spray the contact cleaner generously on the connector, ensuring all contact points are thoroughly cleaned. After spraying, use a clean cloth to wipe off any excess cleaner and debris. Make sure the connector is completely dry before reconnecting it. I noticed that the old wire sleeve for the ABS connector is completely broken off. To protect the wires and ensure durability, we need to replace it with a new sleeve. With the new wire sleeve installed, the ABS connector is now protected and ready for reinstallation. Positioning the jack under the suspension assembly. This will allow us to carefully adjust the height to align the bolt holes on the strut. Slowly raise the jack to lift the suspension assembly. Go gradually and make small adjustments to get the bolt holes on the strut aligned perfectly with the mounting points on the vehicle. Once the bolt holes are aligned, it's much easier to insert the strut bolts. With the height adjusted correctly, you can now insert and hand tighten the strut bolts. After they are hand tightened, use a wrench to fully secure them. Set your torque wrench to the manufacturer's recommended torque setting. Then, tighten the bolts until you hear or feel the click that indicates the correct torque has been applied. Give the brake line clip a good clean with metal brush. Next, position the brake line back into its bracket on the strut. Ensure the line is routed correctly and isn't twisted or under tension. Now, take the cleaned brake line clip and secure the brake line in place. The clip should snap into position, holding the brake line securely. Gently tap the clip into place. The rubber mallet helps prevent any damage to the clip or brake line while ensuring it's securely fastened. Tap carefully and evenly until the clip is fully seated. The final step is to tighten the stabilizer drop link to complete the installation. Make sure to hold the bolts steady with one spanner while tightening the nut with another, just like we did earlier. If you have a torque wrench, it's a good idea to use it to apply the manufacturer recommended torque to this nut as well. Let's do a final check to ensure all components are secure. Check the strut bolts, brake line, ABS wire, and stabilizer anti-roll bar drop link to make sure everything is properly installed and secure. This completes our installation of the new strut assembly.